Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
This week's episode is brought to you by italki.com. Italki is a language learning platform where learners and teachers from all over the world can link up to do affordable and badass language lessons.
Yeah, italki has been one of the best ways for both Ryan and I to learn languages. You learn to speak like a local from a local. You can choose any language around the world, hop on Skype. It's really fast, affordable, and just an efficient way to really start your language learning or to progress what you've already done.
Yeah, and it's super flexible, so you can find someone who is willing to work with you on just the things you want to work with, and you can get rid of your
Duolingo
or
textbook.
Yeah, or your Spanish teacher, Frank Thomas in Ontario, and trade him up for Alejandro in Colombia.
We've got a special promo going on for the World Wanderers listeners, where if you buy your first lesson, you'll get your second lesson free. This is a super, super great deal. You can find it at promos.italki.com/the World Wanderers.
Check it out. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the World Wanderers podcast. Today we are talking about stuff.
And things.
And more stuff.
And more things.
Well, one of the most common questions we get is, what do you guys do with all that stuff when you went traveling?
Yeah, it's something that now that we've traveled quite a bit seems kind of like intuitive to us, like it's just, you know, what we do. But if you've never traveled before, it's one of those big things that kind of complicates how long you're going to go for, if you're going to go for, 6 months to a year, so like a longer term period of time. It's like, I own all this stuff, what am I going to do with it?
So this episode's kind of directed towards the long-term traveler, someone who's going to be kind of leaving behind life at home for a while and going out for a couple months, or maybe with an indefinite return date. How do you think about dealing with all the stuff you've accumulated in your home life?
Yeah, definitely. Or even listeners out there who are like, yeah, great, this sounds awesome, but I don't know how to actually execute this and make this a reality for myself. This is sort of the episode for you in terms of what to do with the things that you own.
Yeah, so the very first time we went traveling, we had both been living on our own and moved out of those houses and kind of just like kept almost all of our stuff. We got like a pretty big storage unit. We threw out stuff that was like obviously useless, but didn't really like pare down anything too much, and had like quite a large storage unit.
Yeah, it was interesting because I moved out of the house that I lived with roommates in university, and basically all the furniture that was in the house was mine. Almost everything except the other girls' beds. And basically we rented a trailer that we attached onto my dad's truck, and we loaded up everything up on there and put it in a storage unit that we rented for the 6-month period of time that we were gone. And this option really worked for us in that situation because we had a 6-month time period that we knew we were going to be gone. And then the plan was, okay, we're going on this 6-month adventure, and then we're coming back and we're like starting life. So why would we start life with nothing? Like, let's start life with the few things we do own.
Yeah, and I remember coming back from that, and every time we've come back, it's been like, why did we keep this? But I don't think it was as strong that first time.
Yeah. I don't remember feeling quite as much like, why do I own this? Like, why did we pay to store this? Like, why was there effort put in moving this from one location to another? Because that's something you always have to keep in mind too, is like, even if you're like, oh, I kind of like it, I might use it in the future. It's like, if you're moving it from a house to a storage unit and then back to another location, there's a lot of like time, energy, and effort that gets put in actually transporting this item that you may or may not ever use. Yeah,
there's all these like opportunity costs, or maybe not opportunity costs, but other costs involved.
Totally.
And so that really came up the second time when we were going to go to South America. We were going to move out of our apartment. We'd been living there for 2 years. So we had basically like everything you'd imagine. And that time we were thinking about it, looked up the prices of storage units, and we're just like, it doesn't make any sense to rent a big storage unit, because if you calculate the cost, 6 months for a big storage unit to store our somewhat mediocre furniture.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the first time around that we did it, we actually split a storage unit with my brother. So we automatically cut down costs there. We also stored it outside of the city, which makes it less costly as well. So it's kind of thinking about those things and how much it's going to cost you per month. But storage units really add up, especially if you're gone for like 6 months to a year. It's a really long time to pay. What do we pay? Like 25 to...
No, I think it's more than that.
Between $25 and $50 per month. Like that really adds up.
I think it was $50 a month.
Yeah. So it's not an insignificant amount of money.
Yeah. And so the basic calculation we were going off of then was, if we sell this now and get X amount of dollars and minus the difference in storage units to have a smaller storage unit, what could we buy something similar in the future? And that's what we did. But like, whenever we get back, we can go to IKEA, go on Craigslist and find something comparable, but we won't have to deal with moving it out because we'll sell it now. Someone's going to come pick it up. We don't have to deal with moving it. We get to save money on a storage unit. And then in the future, we can buy something that's like fits what we need in the future. That was like kind of like the furniture equation.
Yeah, totally. So the second time we left, we decided, okay, like I think we owned 2 beds in a 2-bedroom apartment. So we got rid of both beds, all of our couches, tables, desk, everything that we owned that was actual like big physical furniture we got rid of. And we pared down our stuff so that it fit in a small storage unit. So it was kind of like a 5x5 storage unit. So not too big, but still big enough to hold like quite a bit of stuff, which is something that I really remember from coming back from South America.
Yeah, I remember going into it. So we put all of our stuff up on Kijiji, which is kind of like a Craigslist knockoff that's a little bit more popular here in Western Canada. And I was really surprised at how fast everything sold. Like, the market for used beds was something that was very surprising to me.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to want to buy this like old bed. Like, who wants like a used bed? But we've never had a hard time selling a bed. Since then, we've sold 2 other beds and it's never really been an issue. Yeah.
And then the other thing was that I sold an IKEA desk for more than I purchased it for. It was like the shittiest IKEA desk you could buy at IKEA. And I think I sold it for like a few dollars more than I actually bought it for.
Yeah. I think though, in my experience with selling stuff, and this is actually what I've done the last 3 times we've sold furniture, is if you can find somebody who is sort of in the opposite situation as you, so they're looking to find a place and they have nothing, they'll potentially buy all your stuff and then you just have to give your stuff to one person. And so we've been really fortunate in finding those people, minus like bits and pieces of things, every time we've sold furniture since that point. And that is just so helpful to have one person come with a big truck or a moving truck. You help them unload everything. They give you like 1 wad of cash and it's like, sweet, done, I'm good. Because the other thing you have to keep in mind is that selling stuff online can also be a little bit time consuming in and of itself. I think it's totally worth it, especially if you're going on a long trip and it's going to cost you a per month value to store your stuff in a storage unit. But it is like, you have to take photos of it. You have to put up your ad. You have to, write a little bit of copy of it. So you're like, okay, this is actually something that somebody would want to buy. And then emails start flooding in. It's arranging times with people. And I found, especially in Atlanta, I was a little bit more like nervous as to being like on my own if somebody was going to come and like look at our bed in our bedroom in like basically downtown Atlanta. So there's all these other factors that you have to keep in mind that can kind of be part of your decision factor to figure out what's best for you.
Yeah, it's like you just have to pay attention to the costs associated with something. So there's kind of like a threshold where if it's going to take you an hour of work to sell an item that costs $15, may not be worth your time.
Yeah. And that's also where just like donating stuff comes into play. So we talked to like Shelly and Al McCullough from Sell All Your Stuff. Yeah. And that's kind of their thing is, selling all their stuff.
It'd be weird if it wasn't, and that was their name.
We talked a lot about like they're big on like garage sales and estate sales. And it's something that we've tried in the past. And I felt like that really wasn't worth the time for the amount of money I got.
Yeah. So we'll get to our garage sale experience. But so going down to South America, we sold kind of everything large, but kind of hung on to quite a bit of stuff. We had this 5x5 storage unit, which we kind of like packed full. And
what did it even have in it? Like suitcases full of clothing and boxes of shoes
clothing,
and books.
kitchen stuff, like sporting equipment. Books.
I think my old costume box made it in there. Like, just that is an atrocious decision. Don't hold on to costumes.
And so when we got back, and this is like kind of consistent, like everyone kind of tells you this, you pack up to go traveling and you kind of like struggle to get to the level you're at. Like you're like, okay, bare minimum, like I've really pared it down here. And then when you get back, you're like, holy crap, why did I hang on to this stuff? Like I remember going through the storage unit being like, why did we keep this? Like we have like 6 pans and like random pots and we're like,
tennis rackets that we like never used. We don't play tennis.
Why did we keep this stuff?
Yeah. And that's something that, I mean, I think that some people are probably better at detaching themselves from their material possessions than we are. But I think that it's pretty normal to have this experience of having a house full of things or an apartment full of things. And then you go to get rid of stuff and you really feel like you do need these things in the future. And the biggest thing that travel's taught me is how little I actually need. And it's been like huge for me to just purge my stuff. Like it's a continual process for me as I get smaller and smaller and smaller with my life possessions. Why are you laughing?
Just life possessions. That's a weird way to say it. And I think the other thing to think about is the decision-making process that you use when you're getting rid of stuff. The kind of question a lot of people ask themselves is, could I possibly use this again? Which isn't the best way to make that decision, because then you end up holding on to stuff that may be useful to you in the future, but you don't have a definite use for it, versus saying, like, do I absolutely definitely need this, and will I not be able to replace it?
Yeah, definitely.
Because if you, for example, like I think we held on to a whole bunch of pots and pans.
Not even nice ones.
And one of the brilliant things about being alive in 2016 is that you can go to Walmart or Amazon or Canadian Tire and get really cheap but decent stuff. So if you get rid of it and it turns out, oh, hey, I actually do need this like pineapple core, or I really do need this X whatever thing, you can easily acquire that for yourself in the future.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's something that I remember we were just so shocked when we got back from South America. South America was such a life-changing trip for us and changed our mentality in so many ways. And just being like, why do we have all this stuff? So when we got rid of our stuff going down to Atlanta, it was really like the person who came and bought all of our furniture also took all of our kitchen stuff. Outside of, I kept like one set of knives that are really nice and a couple mugs that are kind of souvenir worthy that would mean nothing to this dude, but like I really enjoy.
Yeah. So our basic decision there was when we decided we're moving for the third time, going away to Atlanta for just a temporary period, we kind of looked into storage units and they're just not affordable. And so we're like, okay, this kind of fits anyways. Like, let's just get rid of everything we can't take with us, because that's kind of what we're trying to get to the point where we're just traveling as we want to, no firm home base, which means you can't just hold on to stuff.
Yeah, like stuff that you may or may not use in the future. And it was interesting. There's a part of me that felt kind of resistant to it. Like I was like, oh, but what if we just like put a box of like pots and pans and kitchen stuff in my trunk and then I can drive it down to Atlanta.
Or if we head up into the woods and bury it.
Come back for it 10 months later. I never suggested that things though. But something I really learned going down there is that like things are really affordable, and we kind of only purchased the things we needed. So we had one frying pan, I think like 2 pots, only a couple of plates. And the only time it was actually awkward was when I hosted Christmas dinner and we had 5 people over, and it's like, oh, we actually only own 2 plates. So
And we actually only have 2 chairs.
we only have like the necessities that we need. But I mean, our friends understood. It's really easy to buy like even recyclable plastic plates. Like that's a thing. Recyclable plastic cups. Like it's really easy to buy that shit if you don't have it. And I feel like that was kind of one of the first times where I was like, yep, okay, like this is a good decision. Like we didn't need all this stuff. And then when we left Atlanta, it's like way less stressful because we barely have anything.
Yeah, but it was even funny there because we didn't buy that much stuff, but we still had to get rid of quite a bit of it. And then like the last minute, like, okay, we need to fit everything into the car because we're driving home. It was like, wow, we really expanded our amount of things.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of like a human nature thing, is like you want to be comfortable in the situation you're in, even if it's only for a couple months. And there's certain things that just add comfort, like a squatty potty.
Yeah. And it's just, it's one of the great lessons you learn while traveling, because when you're traveling around with just a backpack, you're very aware of the amount of space that you have. So if you're out making a decision to buy something, you have to think about, okay, this means removing something from my bag or mailing something home, or it means like I just have to deal with like fighting my bag even more to get it in there. So that's like one of the biggest lessons people learn while they're out traveling. But then when you don't have that constraint, there's no pressure. So you can just think like, oh yeah, I might use this. I've got tons of space. And you just have this tendency to fill it up, which is one of the things when we were talking to Shelly and Al from Sell All Your Stuff. They've been living kind of a nomadic lifestyle, but in slower trips. So they'll book an apartment for a couple months and they notice that, oh yeah, we've kind of settled in here in like this apartment we've rented, and like slowly some things are starting to materialize.
Yeah. And I think they also talked about like purchasing a car.
Yeah.
And then like, they're like, oh yeah,
and we use the car like that.
We bought yoga mats because now we've got space for them. And it's sort of interesting to see this, like, I don't know, like maybe innately human quality that we've developed in our modern society.
Well, no, it's not, definitely not. I think it may speak to human nature because you just want to like accumulate stuff.
Yeah.
Because like the guy with the more tools is going to win.
Yeah. And so to kind of come around to what I sort of touched on before, it's really interesting to think about this like selling your stuff versus just getting rid of your stuff. And it's something that I sort of learned a little bit in Atlanta. Like I was having a really hard time trying to actually sell our kitchen stuff. Like I wanted to get a little bit of money for it, like maybe $20 or $50 for like the kitchen stuff we'd purchased at IKEA. It wasn't like shit stuff by any means, not the best, but like not terrible. And I think that because you can buy stuff like that pretty affordably, people actually don't really want to pay too much for it. Like they would rather go out and buy their own plate or their own kettle for X amount of dollars instead of using your like used one. And it's something that I was like, oh, this is kind of a bummer. You know, we probably spent like maybe like $100 or $200 on all this stuff and we're getting nothing back for it. And my instinct is like, I'll hoard it and take it back to Canada with me so that like I'm not wasting it. But then at the same time, it's like to give it to the Salvation Army. There's like no harm in that. It goes to somebody who actually can't afford to buy that stuff, which is like not the worst.
Or maybe just sits there until they throw it out.
Yeah, but I mean, you want to hope for something better than that. But it's kind of this like you've already paid for it, so it's this like sunk cost value. Like you've already paid for it, you've used it for the lifetime of what you're going to use it for, and if nobody else wants it, you got to just get rid of it.
Yeah, and it kind of relates to what you said before about the amount of work that can go into selling stuff, because some of those objects were very inexpensive. And even if you are able to sell them, so it may be hard to give them away after you fail to sell them, but even trying to sell them is a cost because you could have been doing something else with your time. So just deciding right from the jump, like anything small, I'm just donating it. I'm not even going to like waste my time trying to sell it.
Yeah. And I don't think that there's any real like right or wrong. There's kind of what's just best for you. So it's, you know, if you own a bunch of stuff and you need extra money for your trip and you're kind of like that's like what you're working towards and that's what you're really like your end goal is, then I think that there's a lot of really good practices for going about selling everything. Whereas if you're on a time crunch and you just need to get rid of everything, then, you know, selling what you can, what's worth something can be great online or maybe a garage sale. But then donating the things that kind of people don't nibble at can be a really valuable thing.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the best practices that we've learned for getting rid of things in pre-travel preparation.
Yeah, I think that Kijiji or Craigslist or, you know, whatever form of like online selling thing is the best.
The big one is kind of Craigslist, but then also quite a few people are using Nextdoor now.
Yeah, so Nextdoor, I don't know what cities that's in the US.
I know it's everywhere.
Okay, I know that it's something that I used in Atlanta. So it's great if you're in like a really big city because it actually takes your neighborhood. So it's people who are within your vicinity. And something that I found with Craigslist is like people would be interested in something and then they'd be like, oh, where do you live in the city? It's like, oh, South Buckhead. No, you're an hour away from me. Like I'm not going to drive there for a $50 table. And with Nextdoor, people are in your neighborhood. So like I sold books for $5 on there. I sold clothing on there. I sold things for really small amounts, but it kind of added up the more I sold because people are within like your neighborhood. So they're willing to walk or drive to your house because you're kind of on their way to or from work or where they walk their dog in the morning. So I think that was really great. And we also have, there's lots of online Facebook groups now for selling things. Like I know that there's like groups for just selling things like Lululemon clothing. And here in the Bow Valley, we have like Banff and Canmore buy and sell. And that's a really good way to sell your stuff, whether or not it's like sporting equipment or furniture or clothing. And so seeing if your neighborhood has something like that.
Yeah. And then so when we moved out of Canmore, we decided that, I don't know what we decided. I think I was actually quite against the idea.
I was going to say, did you decide that or was that just
Amanda
me?
decided that we were having a garage sale.
I just remember them being so successful in my childhood. Like my mom getting so much cash for like board games that didn't even have all the pieces in it. I think the garage sale game has like changed a lot since the 90s.
Yeah, the internet has ruined the garage sale. But so we actually did like move all of our stuff down into a driveway and sat there for a day.
No, like 11 to like 2.
Yeah, okay. Essentially a day.
3 hours, 4 hours.
But yeah, total failure.
Like not a total failure, but it was kind of
we
more like...
We did meet a neighbor.
Yeah, we like met a neighbor who lent me a book, which was kind of cool. But it was kind of interesting because it was actually like the roommate that lived downstairs, sort of in like the basement suite of our place, who bought most of this stuff, which is kind of interesting because one of the tactics that I used in Atlanta was actually reaching out to my network. So reaching out to the yoga instructors I knew in town and being like, hey, does anyone need anything? And reaching out to sort of people in my network, like the people I work at Lululemon with. It's like, do y'all need anything? Like, here, this is what I've got. And I think that can actually be more effective than having a garage sale. I think it's really looking at what you've got to sell. Like, I don't think that we had big game garage sale pieces.
Yeah, I think that for most people our age, like people still go to a garage sale, but you can get your stuff in front of more people if you're using Nextdoor or Craigslist.
Or a Facebook group. The only thing is like there's a certain group of people who are older and who like to go out garage sailing. And that's a good chance to sell some stuff. I think though, it seems like people are either like older and looking for really unique pieces, or it's more like parents who are looking for like toys that they could buy their children really affordably, or like maybe kids clothing. And I don't really think that anything that we were selling was sort of in the realm of what people were looking for. Another thing is doing your research if you're going to do a garage sale, because I was just like, yeah, Sunday works best for me with my work schedule. Like Ryan was done work by that period. Okay, cool. Let's do Sunday. And then somebody came by and was like, oh, you like missed the garage sale day yesterday. And I was like, damn it. Like people apparently don't garage sale here unless it's Saturday.
Yeah.
So doing your research in that regard, I think is really important if you're going to do that.
After doing one garage sale, the odds of us doing another one are effectively zero.
Yeah, I think like for at least right now. I mean, maybe in the future, if we had a home full of like children's toys or something, maybe we would, but I don't see us having
But
that.
by that point in time, there's probably some better tool.
It's probably like virtual reality garage sales or something.
And then, so if people are thinking about doing a storage unit, what are some of the things to consider there?
I think considering what you have and what you're storing and why you're keeping it. Like, is it actually meaningful to you? Are you actually going to use it in the future? Also considering how long you're going for, because if you're only going for 3 months and you're coming back and you're going to pick up life pretty similarly to how it was before, maybe just like different job or something like that, then it might be totally worth it for you to just pay, a little bit of money to hold all your stuff.
Yeah. And I think one thing to consider is that if you're going out for a long-term trip and you kind of are using it as a career break, you don't know if you want to come back to the same city afterwards. You don't know if you want to do a similar job afterwards. Putting yourself in a position where you can be really flexible at the end is pretty valuable. So like if you come back and you've got a whole bunch of stuff to deal with, that's not nearly as fun as just being like, oh, hey, I'm actually over here in New Zealand and I kind of just want to like stay here. I don't want to come back and like deal with my car or my whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's the next thing I wanted to talk about.
We'll talk about cars in a second, but doing the math on your storage unit, like how much is this going to cost over the entire period? So if you're paying $80 a month for a big storage unit over the course of 6 months versus what could you get at IKEA to outfit your house afterwards, especially if you're kind of living a more transient life like we are. Like when we moved to a city and we're like, okay, we're probably going to stay here for like 10, 12 months, not forever. Like we don't want to spend money on furniture.
Mm-hmm.
And then also it's hard to put yourself in this headspace, but basically everyone who goes on a long trip comes back and thinks to themselves, why do I have all this stuff? Like I've gotten along fine with just what's in my backpack. So once you've like packed up the stuff you're taking on your trip and you're working on moving, thinking about putting yourself in a headspace where it's you 6 months in the future, you've gotten along perfectly fine with everything you have in just your backpack. Like that's suited you perfectly fine. Like what do you really need out of the stuff that's left?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's like definitely easier said than done. I think that it is a practice that maybe is not quite there until you've had that experience. I think acknowledging like the things that you actually struggle getting rid of. So I know for me, it's clothing, and for Ryan, it's books. And it's just stuff that I think like my mindset is like, oh, I really liked this shirt at one time. Like maybe I'll wear it again, even though it's been 1.5 years since the last time I wore it. And being like, okay, I've had great memories with this shirt, but it's just a shirt. Like, why don't I, give it away or donate it or sell it to somebody who can, make their own memories in this shirt. And I don't really know what it is for you. I think that it's like, oh, I really enjoyed this book and I might read it again in the future.
Yeah, I remember talking about this with Jake DeSellis in our Path to Permanent Travel episode, just about how a lot of people use sentimental. Is that the word sentimental?
Yeah, sentimental.
Sentimental value as an excuse not to get rid of something. And so we were talking about books, and he was very much the same way I was, where books were kind of, it wasn't necessarily just words on paper. Like he had all of the books he's read, and he liked physical books. And so I've definitely hung on to those things. I've thrown out some books, but there's still like a couple crates of books sitting at my parents' house, along with all the books I have here now.
Yeah.
And he kind of talked about it as an exercise to not attach so much of who you are to objects. Like it's okay to feel this like sentimental value, but it's not necessarily a good reason to keep something. Like I remember the story he told that really hit me was how he had this guitar that he had bought when he was younger and learned to play guitar, and he never really learned to play guitar on it, and eventually did. But he still just got rid of that so he could go traveling and not have to worry about carrying this guitar around.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is like a good challenge to get rid of things that you like really like or really liked in the past, even though it like means a lot to you. And I think that that's kind of like a good place to segue into owning a vehicle, because what do you do with a vehicle when you travel?
Yeah, so the first 2 times we traveled, we both had cars, and we both decided to keep them. And so I think something that we underestimated is the toll that it takes on your car to leave it sitting somewhere for 6 months.
Especially if you live somewhere cold.
Yeah,
like
especially in Canadian winter. When we left, both times we've left our cars sitting during the winter, and you come back, and then there's like a big ass bill that's required to get your car up and running again.
Yeah, and I think that the thought process for me both times is like, okay, I can put my insurance down to fire, theft, and vandalism. It's $25 a month, so it's not super expensive. And I can, leave it on my parents' driveway. It can sit there for 6 months. It'll be totally fine when I come back. And, the cost of $25 per month is so insignificant compared to the cost of a new car. Like, a car is worth so much more than a plate or a couch even, or anything that you own in your wardrobe.
It just depends on the car or the plate.
I guess so. Yeah, that's a fair point. But in general, I'm going to say that that's like a pretty true statement.
Tricky with those generalizations.
Anyways, the first time I came back, I actually had to replace the brakes on my car. And I didn't have the money at the time to do it. So my parents paid for it, and I ended up spending like 6 months paying them back for new brakes. It was like $1,000 or something to get everything replaced. The second time I came back, my battery was completely dead. So I had to hitch a ride into town, buy a new battery, couple $100, take it back, install the new battery, and then take my car in and get it serviced. And, there's all these like filters you have to replace because it sat for so long. And Ryan actually had a family of mice that decided to inhabit his car since his parents live like more on farmlands. And he had to replace brakes as well as a few other things. And so the cost that you put into it after that is kind of like, I don't know, it can be pretty hefty. And especially if you get back from traveling and you're like, I don't really have money to like put into this big material good, it can be a lot. Yeah.
Or if you come back and you decide you want to move somewhere else and you don't want to take your car with you, and then you've got to pay $2,000 to fix up your car so you can sell it for $3,000.
Yeah, you kind of just hope that somebody like crashes into the side of it.
Why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah, and so I still have my car, but Ryan sold his before going down to Atlanta. So I'd love to hear, like, was there some freedom attached to getting rid of this thing that you'd had for like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years?
Yeah, I really liked my car. It was a nice little Subaru. It's kind of this beige color.
It's silver.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen it since selling it.
I saw it once.
But I don't know. So freedom, I don't know if that would be the word I use. But it is really nice not having all the expenses that go along with having a car. So like not having to worry about paying $100 every month for my insurance, not having to worry about filling it up with gas, or when there's like some weird, I used to have a lot of car anxiety, like when there's some weird grindy noise and I'm like, oh God, I don't want to pay thousands of dollars to deal with that problem.
Yeah.
And I think this is another thing where you kind of can really appreciate living in 2016, because in most major cities that aren't ass backwards, you can take Ubers or Lyfts or some other cool ride sharing service. And really, those are getting to the point where in Atlanta, for example, like it really competes with owning a car price wise.
I mean, depending what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah. So this is obviously dependent on, like, if you don't have a car, you have to set up your life in a different way than if you do have a car. So moving down to Atlanta without a car for me, I was like, okay, I'm just going to find a place to live that's right near where I'm working. And then when you find a place to live that's near where you're working, you don't have to really worry about having a car. And the times you do need to make a longer trip, you can take an Uber or a Lyft, and then you're like, okay, cool. This only costs like $12 to get across the city the one time you need to go, or take public transit if you want to expose yourself to that.
Yeah, I think that it is really looking at what your life's going to be like. I think for me, I mean, obviously, I was like, okay, I'm going to drive down to Atlanta because I'm not working in Atlanta and it's like this massive US city. And I think that my quality of life will be a lot better if I have a car down there. And for me, I think that was true. And it was worth like the costs that I put into like monthly upkeep of my car. I think that something that I really looked at is like, you know, how much is my car worth versus like how much am I going to have to put into it if it sits again on another trip. And that's something that, you know, I'm currently thinking about as we get ready to set off onto our next like big adventure.
And what do you think your conclusion's going to be?
I think it's like my car is almost 10 years old, and I think my options are to either commit to like owning it and driving it into the ground, or selling it now, because I think that if it's to sit for the next period of time, it's kind of like going to depreciate enough that it's not really going to be worth much. So I think at this point I'm leaning towards selling.
Yeah, and even
so if anyone
now,
wants a Pontiac G6.
I think that it is just kind of relieving to be traveling and not have to think about, like, obviously you're not going to be thinking about your car very much, but I know when we were traveling the last time, I got an email from my family saying like, oh, hey, like your car's got a bunch of mice in it. And I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, I think that the first time we traveled, I mean, I put my cell phone on hold. So I paid like a $25 a month holding fee. I paid $25 a month for like fire theft and vandalism insurance on my car. And then I paid, you know, whatever my share of the storage unit was. And those costs can be fairly significant when you're traveling somewhere, especially somewhere super cheap like Southeast Asia, where your accommodation is literally like $10 a night. And here you are paying like, you know, what you could get for like 2 weeks of accommodation per month in just like service fees to keep your life kind of intact back home. And it feels easier in the moment in a lot of ways, but then when you kind of free yourself of that, it actually is easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of value that also comes from coming back home from your trip and trying to set up your life in a way where you don't necessarily need a car.
Or like stuff in general, right? Like where you come back and you're like, okay, I kind of own everything I need. I don't really need very much other stuff.
Yeah. And then just like being able to walk home from work is so much nicer than driving to work. And obviously that's like not something that everyone can make feasible. But if you can bike, if you can walk, like you're just mentally like so much better off.
Yeah. Something else I've thought about, and I don't know, like sort of the legality insurance things around this is like, you know, maybe I could keep my car if there's somebody who could be using it for the whole period of time that I'm gone. So they're like, you know, paying the cost of what's associated with it and maybe like a small fee for the depreciation use of my car, but that's like essentially theirs and their responsibility in the time that I'm gone. But then I come home and it's like we have some form of agreement where I take my car back over. And I have no idea what that looks like, but
I feel like it's like you sell it to your friend under the understanding that they'll sell it back to you.
Yeah, I guess something like that. So if you're pretty attached to having your car, but you're like, shit, man, I don't really want like my car to rust in like New York winter or Ohio winter, wherever you are, like Norway winter.
Shout out Norwegian fans.
Yeah. Maybe see if there's like somebody in your life who could use a car for however long you're gone.
Yeah, but I think
especially if it's like 3 or 6 months.
Yeah, but going into travel for the first time, I definitely didn't think that there would be so much required, so many expenses involved afterwards from the car.
Oh yeah, I had like no idea.
But
I was
like
just
basically,
like,
you
sweet. I'm gonna pay like nothing for insurance, just like this small fee to keep it. I'm gonna like let it sit for this time, and then bam, I'm just gonna like turn on the ignition and drive it around, just like same old.
Yeah, and then you have to foot some bills afterwards, and you're like,
right, this.
Yeah. So if you guys are looking for more resources on what to do with all your stuff as you prepare to travel, definitely check out our episodes with Shelly and Al from Sell All Your Stuff, and with Jake DeSillis, it's called The Path to Permanent Travel. And also just check those out. Jake has a couple really good episodes on minimalism on his podcast, The Voluntary Life. And if you go to sellallyourstuff.com, they've got a ton of good resources for actually like going through, selling it, getting rid of it, how to do that stuff.
Yeah, and you can check that stuff out at the show notes as well, www.theworldwonders.com.
Yeah, and if you've gone through this in the past, have any thoughts, definitely shoot us an email. Let us know what you did with all your stuff or what you didn't do and what you regretted not doing with all your stuff.
Yeah. Or if there's something that you're like, okay, I kind of understand most of this now, but I still have something that you didn't touch on. We would love to hear from you. Just share your experience with us, share your question with us. We're always happy to reach out and hear from listeners and any questions or comments that you may have. That's info@theworldwanders.com.
Until next time.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast and would like to support The World Wanderers, you can head to patreon.com/theworldwanderers, where you can join the team, support the show, and help us create awesome content that's valuable for you guys, the listeners.
Thanks again to this episode's sponsor, italki.com. If you're interested in learning a language, go to promos.italki.com/theworldwanderers and get your second lesson free. To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.